Please.
Gerry Adams, Taoiseach, this morning, members of the Irish Farmers Association have gathered at the European Commission office in Dublin to protest against the Commission's offer of a 70,000-tonne beef quota to Argentina, Brazil and other Mercosur countries, as reported recently. And all the main farming organisations across this island have quite rightly opposed this move. Farming organisations are in agreement that there must be a commitment to remove beef and poultry from the agreement, or risk destroying one of our biggest and most internationally reputable industries. Now, if the reports of the 70,000-tonne quota are true, then, Taoiseach, our beef sector and the livelihoods of farmers are being sacrificed for a deal with South America. And this would create huge difficulties at any time. But given the ongoing risks, the unfolding risk of Brexit, particularly for rural Ireland and our agri-food industry, then these difficulties are magnified. Now, Irish farmers have stood up in the past against Brazilian beef imports. They did so for economic reasons, but they also did so to safeguard our high standards on animal welfare and health. So how can this quantity of beef be accepted from states which do not observe the most basic standards? You will know, you were down at the ploughing, that farm income is reaching disastrously low levels, especially for small farmers. But instead of coming up with measures to tackle this problem, to take farmers out of the risk of poverty, the Commission is pushing ahead with its cheap food policy, as well as other free trade agreements like the New Zealand Free Trade Agreement and the Canada-EU Trade Agreement. And in a recent video message, you said you were very much in favour of the Merosur deal because, and I quote, "Free trade, you say, makes everyone better off, creates jobs and creates revenues." And then you go on to say, but there's a particular concern for the Irish beef sector. So this seems to me, Taoiseach, to be a completely and totally contradictory statement. You then go on to claim, "I want to make it sure that we insist really on the highest standards of animal welfare and also health and safety, but also to make sure that our farmers are competing on a level playing field." So, Taoiseach, riddle me this. What does that mean? Tell us exactly what that means, because you don't say that you're going to block the deal. You've been a cheerleader, like your Fianna Fáil partners, for free trade deals. For example, the Canada-EU trade agreement, which you defended yesterday, will allow for up to 65,000 tonne of beef to be imported into the EU tariff-free, along with 65,000 tonne of pork. And the Mercosur states already supply up to 75% of third-country beef imports to the EU market. So giving them greater access would be a huge mistake. So I'm asking you, Taoiseach, to intervene, be very, very clear, to make it plain to the Commission that it should not proceed with this trade deal.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
First of all, I'm glad that you're watching my video messages. They do seem to be having some traction anyway, at least in terms of getting accurate messages across, not just the general public but also to opponents. I have intervened already. I met with President Juncker in Tallinn specifically to talk about Mercosur. I met with the IFA about it, and you can be sure that lots of people at the ploughing and the Iverk Agriculture Show in Kilkenny raised it with me, and I left President Juncker in no doubt of Ireland's position with regard to our beef industry. I reminded him of his State of the Union speech, in which he said that we don't just export products and services, we also export our standards and values. And I said that I expected that to be reflected in any free trade deal, that our standards of animal welfare, of animal health, of food safety would be reflected and written into any trade deal. And I also expressed my opposition to an offer of the scale that you've mentioned. So that's the position of the Irish Government. I do think we need to bear in mind, though, that free trade deals are free trade deals. They're not just about one industry or one part of one industry. They're about a whole picture. And we have to judge what's best for the Irish economy in the round, what's best for Irish jobs in the round, what's best for Irish people's incomes in the round. And that's how we approach free trade agreements. We look at them in the round. But obviously what I want is a Mercosur agreement, a trade agreement between the EU and Latin America that will be of benefit to Ireland. And I can't see myself or this government or this Dáil, and it would require the ratification of the Dáil, by the way, approving a free trade agreement that did not do that. So you can be absolutely assured that any trade agreement between the EU and Mercosur will have to benefit Ireland if it's going to pass the government and if it's going to pass this Parliament. But again, I once again detect this ambiguity in Sinn Féin's position towards the European Union. At the moment, you're campaigning against Brexit, you want to keep Northern Ireland in the European Union, and yet all along the way you voted against every European referendum, opposed every free trade agreement. Essentially, the European Union is a free trade bloc. It's at the core of what the European Union does. We have free trade among ourselves, we have a customs union, we have a single market, and we negotiate trade deals with other parts of the world. And we do so from a position of strength because we are the largest economy in the world with 500 million people, and that allows us to negotiate beneficial deals with places like Canada, Japan, and at the moment with Mercosur. And you know, Sinn Féin really needs to decide whether or not it is a Eurosceptic party or not. Because it's just an impossible contradiction that you say you don't want Northern Ireland to leave the European Union, that you're against Brexit, and yet you consistently oppose what is fundamentally at the heart of the European Union, which is economic integration, it's free trade agreements with other parts of the world, and a single market and a customs union.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Adams.
Yeah, Gordon Margaret, let me assure you, Taoiseach, that I'm an avid watcher of your videos. I think you could relax a wee bit in terms of your delivery, but so far so good. You're doing that so bad. And I would commend Twitter to you as well as a means of communication with the masses. But look, there's no ambiguity in Sinn Féin's attitude to the European Union. We're quite rightly critical of a two-tier Europe. Now, I asked you to intervene in very plain words and very direct language, and you say, and correct me if I have this wrong, you're against an offer of this scale. You're against an offer of this scale. Taoiseach, that's not good enough. Everybody here knows that the agri-food industry is one of Ireland's big success stories. We also know that the rural way of life is under continuous threat from urbanisation, from bad government policy, and we all agree that Brexit presents a huge difficulty. So to even contemplate proceeding at this time before the conclusion of the Brexit negotiations is foolhardy.
Thank you, Deputy.
And you can't take this deal in isolation. Your track record, you talk about ambiguity. Your track record in terms of the Canada-EU trade agreement, the New Zealand free trade agreement, is a matter of grave concern. So I'm asking you to defend our agri-food industry. I said there's an urgent need for you to intervene, not to use soft words or ambiguous statements. You need to say no to the European Commission, and you need to say yes to Irish farmers, to Irish farming families, and to our agri-food producers.
Taoiseach.
I think Deputy Adams will be delighted to know that I'm also an avid follower of his tweets. So, but there's there's one thing that I absolutely agree with Deputy Adams about, and that is about the success of our agri-food industry. Why is our agri-food industry successful? Not because we produce for our own market, because we export. It is trade and free trade that makes agri-food successful in Ireland. The fact that we trade so much with the United Kingdom, the fact that we trade increasingly with China, the fact that we trade with the rest of Europe. So on balance, trade is good for Irish agriculture. If we did not have free trade, we would only produce for our own market, and huge numbers of farms would go out of business and become non-viable. And that's why our starting position should be an openness to free trade, because free trade and exports is what has made Irish agri-food so successful. It's why we shouldn't come from a starting position of fear and protectionism. We should be open to free trade agreements. And it is an agreement that doesn't even exist yet. It is something that is under negotiation. And the approach that Sinn Féin seems to be advocating, which is so often their approach, which is to be against it before they even know what it is, that's not a grown-up approach to government.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you.